I love those essays as much as anything she has written. But there were things that I did with Raffi, talk Russian, play sports, yell in Russian, that were particular to my experience. And I came to think there was some value in recording my own groping toward knowledge in this most important of human endeavors, a kind of record of a primitive consciousness making its way toward the light. I was part of the first generation of men who, for various reasons, were spending more time with their kids than previous generations. That seemed notable to me. I recently asked my own father if he remembered my second-grade teacher, Ms. Lynch, because I had just called her up to interview her about education. He said he didn't and wouldn't. "But you must have gone to the parent-teacher conferences," I said. "Oh, no," said my dad. "I was at work." My father had relocated us halfway around the world so that we wouldn't have to grow up in the Soviet Union. Drove me to every single hockey game I ever played in from the ages of 6 to 16, which was hundreds of hockey games. Almost never traveled for work, and taught me math, physics, how to drive, and how to throw a left hook. He was hardly an absent father. But to him, the idea of attending a parent-teacher conference was risible, whereas I consider the quarterly parent-teacher conferences for Raffi major events in my life. This book consists of 9 essays arranged by subject: birth, 0 to 2, bilingualism, discipline, picture books, schools, the pandemic, sports, and cross-cultural parenting. Each of the essays describes my experience as a parent, draws on some of the literature and conversations I've found most helpful or unhelpful in thinking through this experience, and comes or doesn't come to a conclusion. I've tried to make it so that the essays can be listened to independently if a busy parent doesn't have any interest in, for example, bilingualism. But I've also sought to avoid repetition and place things in a more or less chronological way so that a listener going through the entire book can see Raffi and me and his mother slowly moving into the future. Most of the material is from my personal experience, though as you'll see, one of the things I do to understand my experience is read. Where appropriate, I've also used my training as a journalist to talk with some of the people I thought would have the most to say on a given subject. Whether it's the purpose of education, the nature of Russian parenting, or the lessons of parenting research in comparative perspective, I hope these conversations do not seem out of place. They were important to me in thinking through these issues. I wrote some of these essays earlier than others, and in instances where I've changed my mind or learned a lot more about the subject, for example, by having another child and seeing him, at age 3, suddenly turn from angel to avenger, I have tried to incorporate that later insight into the text. The thing I've learned about parenting, the thing that the parenting books don't tell you, is that time is the only solution. You do eventually figure it out, or start to, but by then it is often too late. The damage to your child, yourself, your marriage, has already been done. That is the way of knowledge, though. In its purest form, it always comes too late. Home birth. I was not prepared to be a father. This much I knew. I didn't have a job, and I lived in one of the most expensive cities on the planet. I had always assumed that I'd have kids, but I had spent 0 minutes thinking about them. In short, though not young, I was stupid. Emily told me she was pregnant when we were walking down 34th Street in Manhattan on the way to Macy's to shop for wedding rings. Our wedding was a few weeks away, and I had, as usual, put off preparing until the last minute. I had a fellowship at the time at the New York Public Library in Midtown, and I must have Googled wedding rings near me. Macy's it was. All around us on 34th Street, people were shopping and hurrying and driving and honking. Emily told me, and I thought, okay, here we go. We were going to have a kid. Then I thought, we need to get some very cheap wedding rings at Macy's. I was born in Moscow and came to the United States with my parents and older sibling when I was 6. I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston and found it boring and dreamed of leaving to become a writer. After college, I moved to New York and worked odd jobs and wrote short stories, which I sent to literary magazines, which never wrote me back. To see my name in print, I started doing journalism. I found I really liked it. I also started translating things, stories and oral history, poems from Russian. Traveling to Russia and seeing its version of capitalism up close converted me to democratic socialism. Eventually, I started a left-wing literary magazine, N+1, with some friends, published a novel, and traveled as much as possible to Russia to write about it. This was a decent literary career, truly more than I ever could have hoped for, but it did not bring in a lot of income. When Emily and I met, I was living with 2 roommates in a grand but ancient and cockroach-infested apartment on Eastern Parkway.